If you find yourself traveling along I-49 in southern Arkansas, just east of the Texas border, you might end up passing through a place called Fouke. Fouke is admittedly a pretty small town. In fact, you'd be very hard-pressed to find a cell signal while traveling through there. Aside from a local cafe and a sports center, there isn't much to do, so most of the locals spend their time either hunting or fishing in the nearby streams. The people there are kind and welcoming, full of that southern hospitality we've all heard so much about. All in all, it's a pretty charming place, a place where time almost seems to stand still. There's a stream that wraps around Fouke known as Boggy Creek, and it's here, beneath the lily pads and the murky brown water, that we can find some pretty interesting stories. Boggy Creek, you see, is haunted by a monster. One that stands upright, almost like a man, and is covered head to toe in shaggy brown hair. A monster that's terrorized the people of Fouke for over 100 years. This is Legend Has It. I'm your host, Michael Walker, and the legends about Boggy Creek just might be true. The year was 1971. Apollo 14 was the third successful manned flight to the moon. Future President Jimmy Carter would be sworn in as the 76th governor of Georgia. Archie Bunker was introduced to the world in the CBS sitcom All in the Family, and in October, Walt Disney World Resort would open its doors for the very first time. And on May 1st, 1971, Bobby Ford was admitted to St. Michael's Hospital. And he had one incredible story to tell. He had been staying with his brother Don, Don's wife Patricia, their 4 children, and a couple named Charles and Elizabeth Taylor, who the Fords rented a house with. Don and Patricia had only lived in the house for 5 days before something tried to break in. Elizabeth was trying to take a nap on the couch and had left a window open to let some cool air in. As she was drifting in and out of consciousness, she suddenly jolted awake when she saw a hand reach in through the window. It was hairy, so hairy in fact that at first she thought a bear was trying to get into her house. But then she got a good look at the creature, and it was certainly no bear. Whatever it was shaped like a man, and it stood almost 7 feet tall. To quote Elizabeth from an interview she gave to the Texarkana Gazette, its eyes, quote, looked like coals of fire. She screamed, causing the creature to jump back and alerting the other members of the house. Bobby, Don, and Charles grabbed their guns and set out in search of the thing, telling the women to call the sheriff. They found the monster peering through the windows on the back side of the house. They all unloaded their guns on it, but they missed, and the creature ran off into the woods again. Constable Ernest Walraven responded to their call, but he wasn't much help. He simply supplied the Fords with an extra shotgun and a spare flashlight, and then he left. Realizing that the police weren't going to do anything about the situation, the Fords and the Taylors decided to take matters into their own hands. While their wives stayed inside watching over the children, the men took watch on the front porch. Later in the night, they saw the monster again, prowling closer to the house. They fired at it, and this time they thought they saw the creature fall in the tall grass in the yard. Thinking they had killed the beast, the men went to investigate, but as they approached the spot they'd seen the thing fall, they heard the women scream. Bobby ran back across the yard and was climbing the stairs to the front porch when something grabbed him. A big, hairy, ape-like thing caught Bobby in a death grip and pulled him to the ground. The two wrestled with each other, the creature slashing at Bobby over and over with its clawed hands, and Bobby Ford trying desperately to run away to the safety of the house. Luckily, he managed to break free and leapt for the door. He crashed through the front entrance and landed on the floor while the women quickly shut the door behind him. Constable Walraven was called back to the house, but he couldn't find any evidence of the thing that had attacked Bobby Ford, and so he left again. When they thought it was safe, the adults took Bobby to the hospital where he was treated for, quote, scratches and mild shock. Charles and Don searched the property the next day, but what they found left them with more questions than answers. In the loose soil around the house, they found large, human-like footprints with 3 long toes. After that, the Fords knew what they had to do. They wasted no time in packing their belongings and leaving Fouke. They never came back. The Ford incident ignited a wildfire in the town of Fouke. Shortly after the Fords left Fouke, Little Rock radio station KAAY advertised a reward for $1,090 to anyone who could capture the monster alive. This brought in a swarm of monster hunters from all over Arkansas to try and capture the beast. Reports indicate that at one point there were roughly 500 hunters in the area searching for the Fouke monster. Authorities had to set up special phone lines for the purpose of reporting sightings, which quickly became flooded with calls. There were numerous accounts of hunters making their way onto other people's private property, and although no one was harmed during these romps, local authorities decided to be cautious and place a ban on carrying firearms outside of hunting season. In fact, things got so dire that Deputy H.L. Phillips later admitted that authorities would purposefully withhold information from the media in order to keep the peace. And yet, monster reports still continue to flood in. On May 24, 1971, the Texarkana Daily News published a report submitted by a couple and their friend who were driving down Highway 71 near Boggy Creek. It should be noted that this incident occurred only 7 miles from the Ford residence, which was also seated near the creek. D.C. Woods Jr., his wife, and a Mrs. R.H. Sedgas were traveling down Highway 71 when they spotted a large, hairy creature crossing the road. They said it, quote, looked like a giant monkey, and its long arms swung at its sides like an ape. While investigating another report in June of that year, Constable Paul Jewell and Deputy Constable Richard Haygood found more of those emblematic three-toed footprints outside of an abandoned fertilizer plant. On June 13th, a man named Yother Kennedy was plowing his soybean field near the South Fork of Boggy Creek when he found more of those three-toed tracks. The tracks measured 13.5 inches long with a stride of nearly 5 feet between them. And just to give you an example, the average stride of a 6-foot-tall man is only half that distance. Photographs were taken and plaster casts were made, and a man named Willie Smith, who actually owned the soybean field, made a startling declaration. According to him, the creature had been stalking the area for a while at that point. Smith even said his own niece-in-law had seen the Fouke monster in the soybean field just 2 weeks prior. In a later interview, Smith also stated that his sister Kate Savell saw the creature back in 1908. She was only 10 years old at the time, but she told her family that she saw the creature looming around Boggytown, a nearby lumber settlement that had long since been abandoned. A lumber settlement just on the edge of Boggy Creek. And if this is true, she would be the earliest recorded witness of the Boggy Creek monster by several decades. One of the onlookers present at Willie Smith's soybean field that day was a man named J.E. Smokey Crabtree. According to him, the Crabtrees also have a long, interesting relationship with the Fouke monster. In 1905, Smokey's Uncle James returned home from the woods with a strange story. He had gone out that morning to set some fishing lines when he came upon a figure crouching by the river. A large, hairy thing, shaped like a man, washing its feet in the water. Intrigued, James tried to paddle his boat closer to the thing, but the creature heard him approaching and ran off into the woods. 10 years later, Smokey's son Lynn had an encounter of his own. Just like any other young boy growing up in the South, Lynn loved hunting. So one morning, he strapped on his boots, grabbed his 20-gauge shotgun, and took it out to a small lake on the Crabtree estate. He sat down in the grass, propping himself up against a tree, and patiently waited for a squirrel to walk past. After a few minutes of waiting, Lynn heard the stampeding hooves of his neighbor's horses coming down a nearby trail and running straight into the lake. The boy didn't think much of it at first. The neighbor's horses crossed onto his family's property all the time, but then he heard the Crabtree's pet dog bay, as if something was upsetting him. This caused Lynn to finally leave his spot to go see what was happening, and as he turned around, he saw it, an 8-foot-tall ape man, looming only 10 yards away from him. The creature began lumbering towards Lynn, and the boy panicked. He fired, aiming for the creature's head, but somehow missed, He shot again and again, still with no effect. The monster continued chasing him. Scared out of his wits and with no other options, Lynn fled for home. The Crabtrees had some family friends over that day, so Smokey and his wife were probably a little annoyed when their son burst through the door, causing a huge ruckus. But their annoyance would be short-lived, as Lynn quickly told them about his encounter. Curious, Smokey left the rest of the family to go investigate. He found the spot where Lynn had been sitting, and he found spots in the trees where bark had been knocked off from Lynn's squirrel shot. These marks were congruent with him aiming to hit something standing roughly the same height as the creature Lynn described. The family had distinctly heard him fire his gun, even from the house, but there was something odd about it all. Try as he might, Smokey couldn't find any of the spent bullet casings. Perhaps, he thought, whatever had attacked his son was intrigued by the shiny metal trinkets and took them. Several friends of the Crabtree family volunteered to help search the property, and Smokey would spend several nights over the ensuing weeks scanning the forest from his front porch, but nothing ever came of it. Smokey would go on to immortalize this incident in his memoir, aptly titled Smokey and the Fouke Monster. However, the Crabtrees weren't done with the beast just yet. Smokey would soon cement their family name in Arkansas history forever when he helped produce a cult classic documentary about the monster. Smokey wasn't actually the one who made the documentary. It wasn't even his idea. No, that honor falls on a man named Charles B. Pierce. In 1971, the Fouke monster was plastered all over newspaper headlines in Texarkana. As I said, hundreds of people came from out of town to hunt the thing, and there were countless reports every week. It seemed as though Boggy Creek was all people could talk about, which is why Charles Pierce tried to capitalize on the mania. At the time, Pierce owned and operated an advertising agency in the Texarkana area, where he shot commercials for many local businesses. It was this experience with filmmaking that gave him the idea to produce a movie about the strange reports coming out of Fouke. It took some negotiation, but Pierce was finally able to convince a business client, a man named Ledwell, to help produce the movie. Unfortunately, the people of Fouke were a lot harder to negotiate with. The residents of the small town were very apprehensive about sharing their stories with the out-of-towner. They were afraid of being made fun of being seen as simple rednecks making up stories about a boogeyman. However, Pierce was not easily dissuaded and kept asking around. Finally, a man agreed to tell Pierce the story of one morning when he was working in his barn. He stepped outside for a minute, and he saw the creature walking upright across the field into the nearby woods. The man even took Pierce out to the spot where the sighting happened. Pierce asked the man if he could tell the story in his movie. The man agreed on one condition: they wouldn't mention his name. Pierce would go on to interview other locals. He notably included the Ford incident, as well as the story of a Miss Mary Beth Searcy, who claimed she, her sister, and her mother all saw the creature skulking through their yard one night. It was during these investigations that Pierce would meet Smokey Crabtree. Smokey told him about the experiences of James and Lynn, and being a rather enterprising individual, even offered to take Pierce out on his canoe to take establishing shots of the swamp. He also acted as a tour guide, showing Pierce around the Boggy Creek area and introducing him to the locals. It's safe to say that Pierce wouldn't have gotten nearly as many interviews for his movie without Smokey's help. Crabtree even helped to procure some of the cast, who Pierce was adamant had to be made up of only Fouke locals. He had Mary Beth Searcy play her older sister in the retelling of her encounter, and Lynn Crabtree, who wanted no part in the film, was replaced by his brother Travis. Travis would probably regret taking his brother's place, however. See, despite being a genuinely terrifying film, even with its cheesy and now outdated special effects, and a monster that's composed of a man in a gorilla suit, Pierce's movie had one distinct characteristic that separated it from other monster flicks: a series of soft ballads composed and performed by Charles Pierce himself. If you've ever seen Pierce's documentary, The Legend of Boggy Creek, you probably know just the song I'm talking about. A catchy, heartwarming theme about a boy paddling his canoe through the mysterious Arkansas wilderness, young and carefree, and enjoying the beautiful scenery. A song titled Hey, Travis Crabtree. The Legend of Boggy Creek was a box office hit. It was shown in theaters all across the United States and ended up grossing over $25 million. And it made the town of Fouke infamous, especially among Bigfoot hunters. We'll discuss the influence the Boggy Creek monster had on the town of Fouke in just a second, but first, I want to tell you another tale. See, reports of the monster still continue to come in after Pierce's movie was released, although not nearly as often. In 1978, a teenage boy in nearby Bowie County, Texas, found strange footprints in the woods outside his house. In October 1990, two men were driving along Highway 71 when they both noticed a strange odor. When they pulled their car over to investigate, they saw a large, ape-like creature running into the woods towards the Sulphur River. And then, in 1991, the Fouke monster would be caught. As the story goes, James Mackey and a friend of his found an odd-looking heap on Mackey's land near Carmack, Texas. It was a dead body. It was roughly 8 feet tall, had no fur or skin, and barely any muscles left, and the head was missing. But even then, it didn't look like any animal they recognized. Mackey's nephew had heard stories about the nearby town of Fouke, where a strange creature had been reported by the locals, and he immediately thought of a single man. A man whose name had become irrevocably intertwined with the Boggy Creek monster. This man, of course, was Smokey Crabtree. Smokey met the men in Vivian, Louisiana, where he got a good up-close look at the body. Even without a head and missing all of its telltale shaggy fur, Crabtree agreed that it fit the profile of the monster. According to Crabtree, they even went so far as to have the DNA tested, although he says that the tests were inconclusive. And that was it. If they were right, these men were holding on to the greatest scientific discovery of the century, an actual skeleton of the legendary Fouke monster. And what did they decide to do with this discovery, you might ask? Why, they capitalized on it, of course. Smokey was the producer of an event called the Monster City Jamboree. The Jamboree was a music show where a local band would play bluegrass, country, and blues songs every Saturday night right there in Fouke. His show was very popular, and it would prove to be the perfect spot to present his new star attraction. Crabtree sealed the body in an airtight glass case and would show it at the Jamboree to anyone who had $3 to spare. Now, I know how all of this is going to sound, so I want to make something very clear. I don't want it to come across like I'm attacking Smokey Crabtree. It's an easy assumption to make, I know. People fake Bigfoot evidence like videos and footprint casts all the time in order to gain notoriety. In 2008, Rick Dyer and Matthew Whitten infamously tried to pass off a gorilla costume stuffed with roadkill as a Bigfoot corpse. Unfortunately, hoaxes are nothing new when it comes to Bigfoot. But I like to think Smokey Crabtree truly believed he had the real thing. The problem was, he actually didn't. In a strange twist, the body was actually that of a Siberian tiger that had died on an exotic animal farm in Jefferson, Texas. The body was sold to another Jefferson local who took it to a taxidermist to have it stuffed. The taxidermist removed the tiger's claws and its skin, which, yes, would have still left it recognizable as a large cat, if he hadn't also removed the head. For some reason or another, this taxidermist then dumped the remnant skeleton near Mackey's property, where he found it a few days later. By then, the body had started to rot and was completely unrecognizable. And so, even when the alternative would mean believing in a three-toed swamp monster, the truth ended up being far stranger than fiction. Today, it's clear that the monster left its mark on the town of Fouke. I recently had the honor of visiting the town in the summer of 2019 for the Fouke Monster Festival, where vendors sold Bigfoot books and necklaces and donuts shaped like three-toed footprints. There were speakers there, famous cryptozoologists like Ken Gerhard, Jerry Hestand, and Lyle Blackburn, who literally wrote the book on the Boggy Creek monster. There's a white two-story building right up the road from where the convention was held, a local history museum, and right by the door is a shrine dedicated to the Fouke monster, adorned with movie posters, newspaper clippings, pieces from a Fouke monster Halloween costume, and a binder full of monster reports. But quite possibly Fouke's star attraction is the local gas station, the Monster Mart. One side of the store is set up just like any other rest stop, but the other side is Bigfoot Central. There's a shop filled with Bigfoot themed books, t-shirts, postcards, keychains, and even action figures. And in a side room, just to the right of the front door, is a small Fouke Monster Museum, where you can find more pictures and footprint casts, and even take your picture with a mural of the monster. Clearly, the legend of Boggy Creek still lives on in the town of Fouke. Perhaps quite literally. One more story. As I said before, there were hundreds of reports coming out of Fouke between 1971 and 1972. Clearly, we don't have enough time to go over each individual case, but I did want to go over some of the more interesting or influential cases throughout the history of the Fouke monster. And one such case occurred in June of 1971. Early one morning, two men, Al Williams and A.L. Tipton, were driving right up the road from Willie Smith's soybean field. I don't know where they were going, and I don't know who was driving. All I know is that one of them brought the car to a screeching halt when a hairy figure ran across the road ahead of them. At first glance, it's a pretty uneventful encounter. Yes, the men had had a run-in with a strange hairy beast neither of them recognized, but so had everyone else in Fouke. This one also walked on 2 feet like the others, it was also covered in dark hair, and it also swung its arms like an ape. But this particular report is important because of the creature's size. The men reported that it was roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, roughly half the size described in any of the other reports, which has led investigators to believe that the men just might have seen a child. Legend has it was researched, written, and produced by me, Michael Walker, with editing and recording assistance from Nicole Tomplet. All music used in this episode is courtesy of freesound.com, and all links can be found in the episode description along with the sources cited. And just like all other media on the internet, I ask that you please like, subscribe, leave a comment, or a review, all that fun stuff, because I've got some great things planned for you guys coming out soon, and I don't want you to miss any of it. For our next episode, we'll be visiting the frozen forests of northern Canada to sit in on one of the most shocking murder trials of the 20th century, the case of the dreaded Wendigo killers. It's gonna be a good one, so stay tuned, and thanks for listening.